Let's start. So, this is the podcast, The Civic Leader. I'm your host. I'm Sylvie Legere. I'm the co-founder of the Policy Circle. And today we will be going over a brief that's called Education K through 12. And with me to read this brief is my friend and co-leader of the Rose Friedman Society Policy Circle here in Wilmette, Beth Feely. Beth, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to say, since we started, Beth and I seeded the first policy circle, and Beth is now, a freelance writer and editor for various nonprofit organizations, including the Woodson Center. And she actually served as a launch director for the 1776 effort. Previously, Beth worked in consulting and public relations for Hill and Knowlton and Arthur Andersen and for a variety of Fortune 500 companies. And most recently, also, she served as an editor for the Policy Circle. So it's great to have you here. Beth also runs a local civic organization called Nurture Your Neighbors, which promotes common sense policies in local government and schools, which is why I asked Beth to be here, my co-reader on this brief on K-12 education, given your preoccupation. So the idea of this overview of education of this brief is to really provide us with an understanding of what's all involved in education. And Beth, for you, maybe you could share with our listeners, what's your primarily perspective or focus when you think about education?
Well, of course, as a mother, I think about education through that lens. I have 3 children, and of course, when we chose where we were going to live, we wanted them to get a good education. I really think that is what leads to opportunity. And so certainly a lens as a mother, but then also as a lens as a taxpayer and a citizen. I really do think that it's in our society's interest to have a well-educated populace. I think it is good to have public options for people, and I want to make sure that those are delivering education in the best way possible.
Yeah, we're both mothers. I'm also a mother of 3. We have teenagers and went through the whole system. And I have to say that before being part of the Policy Circle, starting the Policy Circle, I had never attended a school board meeting and did not really understand the administrative aspects of education. So for me, it's and I decided to. It was really important, especially for my husband, to send our kids to a public school, and I had never really thought about it. I come from Canada. I come also from a private school, going to private school in Canada. So there's a piece of it about education that you look at it through your own experience that you want to transfer to your kids, and also a broader perspective of education as a whole in the country, in your state, and then in the world. So with that, Beth, let's start. And what we are doing here is we are reading a Policy Circle brief. These briefs are meant for discussion. They're meant to provide an overview of an issue. And between each of the sections, we'll have a very brief discussion. But this is about the facts that then you could use in your own circle or environments to discuss the topic of education. So I'll start off, with an introduction that we have here, that education is the pathway to a productive life. All people need basic literacy, math skills, knowledge of the world around them to function in today's society and to be informed citizen. But despite increased spending, our educational outcomes as a nation are stagnant. How can the U.S. education system better prepare young people for successful adulthood and careers? K-12 education is a vast topic with many interlocking parts, and this brief gives an overview of the major topics within education and some ideas for reform, with the goal of every student having access to an education that equips them with knowledge and skills they need to succeed in the 21st century. And I think that's actually a really important goal setting when we think about education, is to equip young people with the knowledge and skills they need to succeed in the 21st century. So the history. So every brief is constructed with a similar structure, and we always start off with the history of the issue of the topic that we are discussing. So I'll start with that. As Thomas Jefferson remarked to James Madison, educate and inform the whole mass of the people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. The U.S. Constitution does not directly address education. The 10th Amendment is often cited for the proposition that education falls within the purview of the states. Though the Supreme Court ruled in 1973 that the U.S. Constitution does not guarantee a right to education, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment is generally interpreted to require the states to provide each child equal access to schooling. According to Kelly McManus of the Education Trust, every state constitution guarantees a right to education, though in varying levels of specificity. Education started out as a private enterprise, becoming a public endeavor in response to the rapid population growth and mass immigration in the 19th century, with the goal of providing social order among a great number of children from a variety of backgrounds. Brookings Institute scholar Ron Haskin and Isabel Sawhill, in their well-known approach termed the success sequence, identify education as the first of 3 steps to be taken for one to join the middle class. At least finish high school, get a full-time job, and wait until age 21 to get married and have children. Our research shows that of American adults who followed these 3 simple rules, only about 2% are in poverty, and nearly 75% have joined the middle class. A quality education provides the foundation upon which one can build a productive life. So it's interesting, in the brief, there's also some key facts. And there's one that I think is particularly interesting is Andrew Johnson first created a federal Department of Education in 1867, which was abolished a year later. And Jimmy Carter relaunched it in 1979. I didn't realize that. In Canada, there is no national ministry of education. It's all left to the provinces and to implement education systems. So it's kind of interesting. The other fact is that the U.S. Department of Education contributes roughly 8% of the elementary and secondary education budget, with state and local governments funding the remaining 92%. So Beth, do you have some thoughts on the history?
I too was surprised that the Department of Education had been created so long ago and then was abolished for well over 100 years. I hadn't realized that. And I know that there are some who today challenge the necessity of having a national level, like federal level, education department. So I that was pretty surprising to me. It really is carried out at the state and local level. And that funding statistic that you just stated reinforces that. But it's interesting to see that, I think the philosophy that it is really should be closest to the people is reflected in the way that we have our education set up, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.